My name is Alexei, and I was 31 years old when I died on August 12, 2023. I had spent the past 8 years working as an engineer at one of the world's leading space companies, pushing the boundaries of human exploration as we worked towards the colonization of Mars. I believed wholeheartedly that my efforts were part of something bigger, that we, as a species, were on the brink of a new era. But what happened to me in those final moments after I died shattered everything I had ever believed. I returned with knowledge so profound, so unsettling, that it changes everything we think we know about the future of humanity. And now, I'm here to tell you the truth. I was born into a family of engineers, where the pursuit of knowledge and discovery was woven into the very fabric of our lives. From a young age, I found myself drawn to the stars. My childhood was filled with books about space, documentaries, and endless questions about the universe. I would spend hours staring at the night sky, imagining what it would be like to venture beyond the Earth, to build civilizations on distant planets. The idea of humans becoming a multi-planetary species seemed like an impossible dream, but one that I was determined to help make a reality. When I graduated from university, the path ahead seemed clear. I immediately joined one of the largest space companies in the world, a company that was pushing the boundaries of space exploration and working tirelessly to develop the technologies needed to colonize Mars. For me, this was not just a job. It was a mission. I wasn't just working for a paycheck. I was working for the future of humanity. Every step we took, every piece of technology we developed, felt like it was one step closer to a new frontier. I truly believed that I would one day be part of something monumental, something that would change the course of human history. My life was filled with ambition. I was surrounded by brilliant minds, each of us dedicated to the same goal, to push the boundaries of what was possible. We worked late into the night, designing engines, refining propulsion systems, and dreaming of the day when humanity would step foot on another planet. The work was grueling, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like a calling. I felt like I was on the verge of something great, something that would be remembered for generations to come. At home, I had the unwavering support of my wife, Olga. She was my rock. We had been together since university, and she understood the sacrifices I was making for my work. She shared my dreams of a better future, even though she often had to face the long hours and constant uncertainty that came with my career. We had just bought our first house in the suburbs of the city, a small but cozy place that we dreamed of filling with children in the years to come. We were planning our family, thinking about the future, and imagining what life would be like once we had children to share our hopes with. Every day, we worked towards that future, knowing that we were building something important. Life, at that moment, seemed clear and predictable. I had my work, my wife, and a clear vision of the future ahead of me. The world seemed full of possibilities. I was part of a movement that would change humanity forever. I felt as though I was part of a team that would make space exploration and colonization a reality. There was so much to look forward to, and every day I went to work, I felt like I was a small but essential part of something far bigger than myself. I believed in our mission, in our technology, and in the people around me. I was living the dream I had had since childhood, and everything seemed to be falling into place. That day, everything went wrong. We were conducting final tests on a new spacecraft, one that was supposed to be part of the first mission to Mars. We had been working on this project for months, refining every detail, making sure everything was perfect. The excitement was palpable. This was the moment we had been preparing for, the moment that would bring us closer to our dream of reaching Mars. Everything had gone according to plan. The first few phases of the tests were flawless. But as we entered the final phase, something unexpected happened. There was a strange shift, a subtle change in the readings. Then, without warning, it all went wrong. I remember hearing a loud crack, followed by a sudden explosion that shook everything around me. The sound of metal ripping apart, the heat, the pressure. It all came at once. I didn't have time to be afraid, not even for a second. My last conscious thought was focused on the data display in front of me, trying to comprehend the sudden surge in pressure. And then, everything went white. I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't see anything. For a brief moment, I thought I was still alive, still standing in the testing room. But then, as the white light faded, I realized I was no longer there. The explosion had knocked me unconscious, and I had no way of knowing how much time had passed. It was as if I had been thrown out of my body, left behind in a dark void. There was no pain, no fear, just a heavy, disorienting sensation. I tried to move, but my body was unresponsive, as if it wasn't mine anymore. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. I could still feel my thoughts, but my body, my physical existence, felt distant, almost unreal. I thought about Olga. I thought about how I had promised her that I would be careful. How I'd promised I would come home safe, no matter what. I thought about our plans for the future, about our home and our dreams. But as those thoughts swirled in my mind, they started to fade into the background, replaced by an overwhelming sense of stillness. There was no longer any pain. There was no longer any fear. I felt light, as though I was floating, suspended in some infinite space. I realized, with growing clarity, that I was no longer in my body. I had left it behind. I could see it, my body, lying motionless beneath the twisted metal and debris. I could see people running toward me, shouting my name, but their voices sounded so far away, so faint, as though they were coming from a different world entirely. I wanted to call out, to tell them I was fine, but no sound came. I was silent, disconnected from everything that was once so familiar. Then everything around me grew even darker, and I lost all sense of time. The world I had known, with its chaos and confusion, was gone. I was alone in a vast, empty space, and for a moment, it felt peaceful. But that peace quickly turned into something else. It was as if something was calling me, drawing me toward it, though I didn't understand what it was. Something far beyond my understanding. I don't know how long I lingered in that void, but when I finally came to my senses again, the darkness had parted, and I was no longer alone. The weight of my existence, the pain, and the confusion, all faded into the background. What I felt now was a profound sense of calm. I wasn't sure where I was or what had happened, but I wasn't scared anymore. In fact, I felt a sense of belonging, as though I was meant to be there. And that's when I realized I had died. When I regained consciousness, it felt as though I was floating in an infinite void. But this emptiness was unlike anything I could ever have imagined. It was not a cold, dark expanse. It was filled with warmth, with a gentle light that seemed to pulse with life itself. This light surrounded me from all sides, and I felt it pulling me toward it, as if it were calling me. I didn't resist. In fact, I felt a profound peace settle over me, something I had never known before. It was as if time and space no longer existed. I was no longer tethered to the physical world. There was only the light and the quiet and the sensation of floating, weightless, free, and at complete ease. As I drifted, the light grew brighter, enveloping me. And then, as though it had been waiting for me, a figure emerged from the glow. At first, I couldn't make out its shape, but as it drew closer, I realized it was a man, standing with arms outstretched, welcoming me. This was no ordinary figure. It radiated an aura of purity and compassion that made me feel like I had been seen and understood on a level deeper than anything I had ever known. It was him, Jesus. but not the image of him I had seen in paintings or movies. This was not the somber, distant figure often depicted in religious art. No, this Jesus was vibrant, alive, glowing with an intensity that seemed to touch the very core of my being. His eyes, the deepest brown I had ever seen, shone with a warmth and love that made me feel both utterly known and completely safe. It was as if his gaze pierced through every part of me, and in that moment, I felt more loved than I had in my entire life. The love that emanated from him was overwhelming, like a wave that washed over me, filling me with a peace so complete that it was almost impossible to comprehend. I had never known such love, love that was pure, unconditional, and all-encompassing. It was a love that seemed to bind me to everything around me, to every living being, to the entire universe. I felt as though I had become part of something vast, something eternal. Then he spoke. His voice was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It was warm, like the gentle sound of rain falling softly on the earth, but it also carried the weight of thunder, powerful and resonant, yet full of deep kindness. When he said my name, Alexei, it was as if the very essence of my soul recognized it, like every part of me had been waiting for this moment. In that instant, I realized that I was no longer the same person I had been. All of my past fears, doubts, and burdens seemed to melt away, replaced by an understanding that transcended everything I had ever known. I had no need to speak. His presence, his voice, communicated everything I needed to know. I was not afraid anymore. I was at peace, at home in a way that was beyond explanation. Every part of me felt whole, as though I had returned to a place I'd been searching for my entire life. Though I couldn't have told you where or when that place had been, I simply knew that this was where I was meant to be. In that quiet, in that peace, I felt something else. Something powerful stirring deep within me. A knowing, a truth I had never before understood, but now felt so clearly, so undeniably. I wasn't alone. I was loved, and there was a purpose to everything that had led me here. There was a reason for my life, and there was a reason for my death. And somehow I knew that the answers I'd been searching for were just beginning to unfold. The figure before me, the radiant presence of Jesus, stood there in all his glory, inviting me to come closer, to understand more, to see beyond what my earthly eyes had been able to grasp. And I knew, deep in my soul, that this moment was just the beginning of something much greater. As I stood in the presence of Jesus, everything around me seemed to fade into insignificance. He had spoken to me with such love and power that I felt everything I had believed in my life, everything I had worked for, was now being called into question. He had told me that I had been working hard to achieve something, but I had no idea what was truly behind it. His words echoed in my mind, urging me to open my eyes to the truth, to see beyond the surface. Suddenly, we were no longer in the place of light, floating in peace. We were in a large room, a conference hall of sorts, with dark, glossy tables that absorbed the light around them. The walls were sleek, modern, but they seemed to have an unnerving quality to them. The people seated around the table were familiar in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. Some of them I recognized from the news, politicians, tech moguls, and business giants who had been part of the world's elite for years. But there was something else there too, something far more sinister. Seated beside these powerful figures were beings that I couldn't understand at first. They were humanoid in shape, but their eyes were completely black, devoid of any iris or white. Their gaze pierced through me, cold and calculating, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. These beings didn't belong here. They were not human, and I instinctively knew they were something far darker, something that didn't belong in the world I had known. Jesus stood beside me, his presence steady and calm amidst the unsettling scene. He didn't speak immediately, but I could sense that he was about to reveal something far more alarming than anything I had ever imagined. As my gaze moved over the room, I saw these figures whispering among themselves, and the conversation seemed to echo in the vastness of the chamber. It was not a conversation about science, or progress, or the good of humanity. No, they weren't discussing how to get humanity to Mars for the advancement of civilization. They were speaking of something far more insidious. They are planning Mars, Jesus said softly, but not for the salvation of humanity. This is a plan for the chosen ones. The words felt like a punch in the gut. My mind raced as I tried to comprehend the magnitude of what he was telling me. Mars, this planet that I had believed would be the future of mankind, was not going to be a sanctuary for humanity's survival. No, it was a place for a select few, for the powerful and the corrupt, who sought not to help humanity, but to escape from something far greater. I listened in horror as the discussion continued. The people around the table spoke not of technological marvels or the excitement of exploration. They weren't concerned with advancing science or making life on Mars sustainable for everyone. Their conversation was focused on something darker: how to evade spiritual responsibility, how to escape from the judgment of God. Mars was not a new frontier for mankind. It was their refuge, a place where they could hide from the truth, from the consequences of their actions. The more I listened, the more I understood the true purpose of the Mars mission. These men and women, these beings, weren't concerned with saving humanity. They were concerned with saving themselves. The technology we had been developing, the spacecraft, the engines, the systems, they weren't meant to pave the way for a better future for all of humanity. They were part of a far more sinister escape plan for the elite, a plan to build a new world away from the reach of God. They think they can hide, Jesus said, his voice filled with sorrow. But they are mistaken. No matter where they go, they cannot escape the truth. They cannot escape me. I felt sick as I began to understand the enormity of the deception I had been unknowingly part of. I had worked so hard, so tirelessly, to help develop the technologies that would take humanity to Mars. I had believed in the dream, the hope that we could build a new future on another world. But the truth I was now facing was far darker. The Mars project wasn't about human advancement. It was about escape. It was about hiding from the consequences of a life lived without accountability, a life driven by greed and power. Jesus showed me more, the deeper layers of the plan. I saw images of underground facilities being constructed on Mars, not for research or colonization, but for something much darker. These facilities were designed to be sanctuaries for those who had fallen from grace, those who had turned their backs on God. Robotic systems had already been sent to Mars, years before the public was ever told about the mission, building the infrastructure to support the chosen ones when they arrived. I felt a deep sorrow as I watched these images unfold. I had been deceived. The mission I had worked on, the dream I had poured my soul into, was not what I thought it was. We were not building a better future for humanity. We were building a refuge for the few who had corrupted themselves, using humanity's noblest impulses to achieve their own selfish goals. And as I watched the scene unfold, I realized that I was not the only one who had been deceived. Most of the people involved in the mission, scientists, engineers, even some of the world leaders, had pure hearts. They wanted to do good. They wanted to help humanity. But they too had been deceived, twisted by the enemy who used their ambitions for his own purposes. We had all been unwitting pawns in a game much bigger than we could have ever imagined. Jesus' voice broke through my thoughts, and I turned to look at him. "Your heart was pure, Alexei," he said with compassion. "But you were deceived, just like everyone else. But now you know the truth." The weight of that truth pressed heavily on me. I had been part of a system that was built not to help humanity, but to hide from it. I had worked towards a future that wasn't meant for the good of all, but for the escape of the few. And now I was left with the terrible realization that I had played a role in something far darker than I had ever known. But there was still hope. Jesus, standing beside me, reminded me that the light of truth could still shine through the darkness. He had shown me the lies, but he also showed me the way forward, a way to share the truth, to expose the deception, and to help others see the world as it truly was. When I returned to Earth, I felt a deep sense of horror and confusion. The life I had known, the work I had poured myself into for years, was all part of something I could never have imagined. The truth that Jesus had shown me shattered everything I had once believed. The mission I had dedicated my life to, the technology we had developed, the goals we had strived for. It was all a facade. It wasn't about humanity's progress or salvation. It was part of a much darker plan, one that had been unfolding behind the scenes without my knowledge. I couldn't help but feel like I had been complicit in something far greater than I could understand. The tools I had helped build, the spacecraft, the systems, the engines, they weren't going to take humanity to a better future. They were designed to enable the elite to escape from their consequences, to hide from the truth, and to protect themselves from the judgment that we all face. I had been part of that plan, unknowingly serving as a pawn in a game that I never understood. Now that I knew the truth, I was left with a responsibility I hadn't asked for, but one I couldn't ignore. I couldn't sit in silence. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine. The weight of what I had learned was suffocating, and I felt the urge to shout it from the rooftops, to tell everyone what I had seen, what I had learned. But the reality of my situation hit me hard. I knew that no one would believe me. How could they? Who would listen to the words of a man who claimed he had died, who said he had seen the truth of the world's hidden agenda? People would call me crazy. They would write me off as a delusional engineer who had suffered some kind of traumatic experience. How could I expect anyone to believe in something so unbelievable? The more I thought about it, the more I realized the challenge ahead of me. I wasn't just confronting the lies of the mission I had worked on. I was confronting the very foundation of what people believed to be true about the world. I was up against a system that had spent decades, if not centuries, weaving a web of deceit. I was no longer just a person telling a story. I was a man who had seen the fabric of reality torn apart and had been shown the truth. But what good was the truth if no one believed it? I couldn't just walk away. I had been shown something, and now it was my responsibility to share it with the world. The decision wasn't easy. I knew that speaking up would make me a target. It would make me a threat to those in power, to the very people who had orchestrated this plan. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood that I didn't have a choice. The lies needed to be exposed. I couldn't let this deception continue, not when I had seen the truth with my own eyes. As I grappled with these thoughts, I realized something else. I wasn't alone in this fight. There were others, people out there who were already questioning the same things I had seen. I had seen the quiet resistance in the faces of my colleagues, in the subtle glances exchanged in the hallways, in the small acts of defiance that went unnoticed. But those who were waking up to the truth needed someone to lead them, someone who had seen beyond the veil, someone who could give them the courage to act. That person had to be me. It was terrifying. The world would not understand what I was about to do, and I would be risking everything, the life I had built, my reputation, my career. But the more I thought about the people I had seen, the ones who had worked for the mission with pure intentions, with noble hearts, the more I understood that it was worth the risk. They deserved the truth. The world deserved the truth. So, I made my choice. I wasn't just going to stand idly by. I was going to fight. Not with weapons, not with violence, but with the truth. I would expose what I had seen, I would speak up, and I would do whatever it took to wake people up to the reality they had been blind to. It wasn't going to be easy. I would face resistance, ridicule, and doubt, but I knew deep down that it was the right thing to do. I was no longer just an engineer working on a Mars mission. I had become a messenger, a witness to something far greater than I could have ever imagined. And with that realization came the weight of responsibility. I had seen the truth, and now I had to share it with the world, no matter the cost. The path ahead was unclear, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to act, and I couldn't look back. I returned to Earth with a heavy heart, burdened by the terrifying realization that everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, was part of a grand manipulation. The work I had dedicated my life to, the missions I had helped design, the technology I had developed. It was all part of a much darker agenda. The mission I thought was about saving humanity, about expanding our reach to Mars, was actually a carefully disguised plan to escape accountability. The truth was so overwhelming it felt like a suffocating weight on my chest. I didn't know how to share this with the world. How could I possibly explain the depth of the deception? How could I make people understand that everything they had been told about space exploration, about the future of humanity, was built on lies? I had been part of it, unknowingly complicit in a plan to create an illusion of progress, all while those in power manipulated humanity for their own ends. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how impossible it would be to communicate the truth. How could anyone believe me? How could I convince people that I had witnessed something so far beyond their understanding, something so deeply hidden that it would shatter their perception of everything they thought they knew? I felt an urgency, a need to act, but with that came a gnawing fear. I had seen the truth, but now I had to decide what to do with it. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. The responsibility was overwhelming. It wasn't just about telling my story anymore. It was about exposing a conspiracy that reached far beyond the walls of the company I had worked for, beyond the borders of the Mars mission. It was about unveiling a hidden agenda that spanned decades and had been shaped by forces I had never imagined. As I considered what to do next, I faced a deeper conflict. Who would listen? Who would believe me? I wasn't just a scientist or an engineer anymore. I was a man who had seen the darkest corners of human ambition. I had witnessed how the very people we trusted to guide humanity were using their power to escape the consequences of their actions, leaving the rest of the world to suffer. They believed they could run to Mars, hide from God's judgment, and continue to manipulate and control from a distance. I had seen it with my own eyes, and I couldn't unsee it. But what good was this knowledge if no one would believe it? How could I prove that what I'd seen was real? That the agenda behind the Mars mission wasn't what the public had been led to believe? The people I worked with, the engineers, the scientists, they had all been driven by a pure desire to help humanity, to push the boundaries of human achievement. But now I knew the truth. They were being deceived, just as I had been. They had been pawns in a game they couldn't even begin to comprehend. I struggled with the idea of speaking out. The truth was so far-reaching, so incomprehensible, that I knew it would be dismissed as fantasy. People would label me as crazy, a man who had gone through a traumatic experience and had somehow lost touch with reality. I didn't know how to get people to listen, to believe that this wasn't just some hallucination or fevered imagination. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that staying silent was no longer an option. I had been shown the truth, and I had a responsibility to share it no matter the consequences. I had become part of something far bigger than myself, and now my mission was clear. I wasn't just an engineer anymore, I was a messenger. I was tasked with revealing the deception, exposing the lies, and helping others see what had been hidden from them. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew it would be filled with doubt and resistance. But I couldn't let fear hold me back. The truth had to be known, and I had to be the one to deliver it. As I wrestled with this decision, I realized that the mission I had been given was not about stopping the Mars project. That was never my role. My role was to bring the truth to light, to help others understand the hidden forces shaping our world. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I couldn't let this opportunity slip away. This was my chance to make a difference, to wake people up before it was too late. The fear still lingered, the uncertainty gnawed at me, but I knew deep down that I couldn't walk away. This wasn't just a mission, it was a calling. And now I had no choice but to follow it, to face the challenge head on, and to expose the truth, no matter how difficult it would be. Once I understood the truth, I knew I couldn't keep it to myself. The weight of the knowledge I carried felt almost unbearable, but I couldn't stay silent. I had to speak, to share the story of what I had seen, of the hidden forces pulling the strings behind the scenes. I struggled with the doubts, the fear of being dismissed as a madman, but I realized that the risk of silence was far greater than the fear of rejection. I had witnessed something too significant, something too important for humanity to ignore. The darkness I had seen, the hidden agenda, had to be exposed. I couldn't let it take root and grow without resistance. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I questioned myself, wondering if the truth would even be accepted. Who would believe me? How could I convince people that the Mars mission was not what they thought it was, that it was part of a larger, more sinister plan? But I knew that I couldn't stop now. I had already come this far, and I had been shown the path forward. I began to share my story with those who were willing to listen. It wasn't about convincing everyone. It wasn't about changing the minds of the masses. It was about reaching the few who were ready to hear the truth, who were prepared to open their eyes to what was really happening. Every word I spoke, every person I reached, was a step toward something greater. It was no longer just about Mars, about space exploration or technology. The truth I had uncovered was about something far deeper, about a spiritual battle, one that was being fought quietly, unseen by most. It wasn't just a fight for physical space or new worlds. It was a war for the soul of humanity. I had come to realize that the mission I had been part of was only one piece of a much larger plan, one that sought to separate people from the truth, to deceive them into believing that their future lay in technology, in escaping Earth, rather than in returning to something far more profound. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo the work I had done, the technology I had helped develop, or the people I had unknowingly aided in their efforts to escape responsibility. But what I could do was help change the future. The future wasn't in Mars or any other planet. It wasn't in the endless pursuit of technological advancement or space colonization. The future, I had come to understand, was in something much greater. The return to the Creator, to the divine purpose for which we were all made. I had learned that the answers we were seeking were not out there in the stars, but within ourselves and in our relationship with God. It wasn't just about convincing people of the deception I had seen. It was about reminding them of the bigger picture, about showing them that their true hope wasn't in building new civilizations on distant planets, but in turning back to the Creator who had made them. Our true destiny wasn't among the stars. It was in reconciliation, in understanding the spiritual reality around us, and in recognizing that we were meant for something far greater than technological progress. The greatest adventure of all was not in space exploration. It was in discovering the truth of who we really were and returning to the love and purpose that had been waiting for us all along. With every passing day, I became more certain of my purpose. I had a new mission now. It wasn't about rockets or spacecraft. It wasn't about sending humanity to another planet. My mission was to share what I had learned, to help others see the spiritual war that was being waged, and to encourage them to wake up before it was too late. I knew that not everyone would listen, that some would think I had lost my mind, but I also knew that for some, my story would be the catalyst for awakening. I couldn't control how others would respond to the truth. I couldn't force anyone to see what I'd seen, but I could continue to speak, to share, to warn. It became clear to me that this was my purpose now. This was the mission I'd been called to. The journey I had thought was about exploring the stars was really about something much more profound. It was about exploring the soul and about guiding others to see the light I had been shown. Every day, I spoke to more people, shared my story with those who were open to hearing it, and slowly, I began to see a shift. Some listened, some questioned, and some began to understand. It wasn't an easy road, but it was the only road I could walk now. And as I shared my truth, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I was no longer lost or uncertain about my purpose. I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at something far more meaningful. And every day I spent living that truth, sharing it with others, was a step closer to the real mission, the one that mattered above all else. I had been transformed. What once was a pursuit of science, technology, and ambition had become a journey of spiritual awakening. And I knew now, more than ever, that the true mission of humanity was not about escaping this world, but about embracing the truth of our existence, returning to our Creator, and finding redemption in His love.